15 years of love, or what I thought was love, ended with a single envelope left on the kitchen counter. My name is Grace Mitchell. I turned 54 last spring in Savannah, Georgia, a town where the air smells like salt and jasmine, and gossip travels faster than the tide. I run a small cafe downtown, the kind where regulars know your name and coffee comes with conversation. For most of my life, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. I had a husband, a home, and what I thought was peace. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. We bought our house 15 years ago, back when everything between us still felt possible. It wasn't big, 2 bedrooms, pale yellow shutters, a wraparound porch, but it was ours. We painted the walls ourselves one humid August weekend, laughing until our arms ached. He promised me then, "This house will always be your safe place." Funny how promises can sound like forever, until they're not. Over the years, the rhythm of our lives changed. At first, it was little things. Dinners that grew quieter, evenings spent on different sides of the couch. I used to fill the silence with chatter about the cafe, about my customers, about the silly things that made me smile. But he stopped listening somewhere along the way. His replies grew shorter, his phone calls longer, and the warmth in his eyes dimmed until it was just reflection. Something that looked like love, but wasn't. I remember the first time I felt him slipping away. It was a Thursday in late autumn. He came home smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't own. When I asked, he laughed, that dry, nervous kind of laugh that doesn't reach the eyes, and told me I was imagining things. And maybe I wanted to believe that. Maybe believing the lie was easier than facing the truth I could feel forming like a storm behind his smile. We had been through rough patches before. The recession hit us hard. We nearly lost the cafe once, but we held on. Or maybe I did. I worked longer hours, took extra shifts, smiled through exhaustion while he found reasons not to come home until late. That's the thing about quiet heartbreak. It doesn't scream. It just settles into the corners of your house until it becomes part of the wallpaper. I kept telling myself things would change. I told myself that love could outlast distance, that time could heal silence. But deep down, I knew I was trying to save something he'd already walked away from. Then one Friday morning, I came home early from the market. The house was too still, the kind of still that hums with finality. On the kitchen counter was an envelope with my name written in his handwriting, the same handwriting that used to leave me love notes in my lunch bag. My fingers shook as I opened it, but the moment I saw the first line, I didn't need to read the rest. It was over. He hadn't left a note of explanation, just his signature on the divorce papers and the faint smell of his cologne still clinging to the air. For a long time, I just stood there. I could hear the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards. Every sound louder than the silence he left behind. 15 years, gone without a word. That night, I sat on the porch until the stars blurred into tears. The wind off the river felt colder than usual, and I remember thinking how strange it was. How a house can still stand, even after everything inside it breaks. I didn't know it then, but the papers he filed would reveal more than the end of our marriage. They'd uncover something he never expected, and something I had forgotten about myself. In the weeks that followed, I moved through life like someone walking underwater, slow, heavy, half-dreaming. Every morning, I woke up expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the coffee machine starting, his familiar cough echoing from the porch. But the house stayed quiet, and that silence began to speak louder than words ever could. I started noticing things I had ignored for years. The dent in the couch where he used to sit, the faint ring his mug left on the counter, the photographs on the wall where our smiles looked rehearsed. It's strange how your eyes open wider after your heart breaks. You start seeing what you refused to see before. Looking back, I realized the cracks had been forming long before that envelope ever showed up. It started with little dismissals. The way he rolled his eyes when I talked about the cafe, how he joked that I played business owner while he handled the real work. At first, I laughed along. I told myself he didn't mean it. But words, when repeated enough, start to carve into you. He changed when his career took off. The late nights became business dinners. The calls I wasn't allowed to interrupt. The way his phone turned face down every time he set it on the table. I wasn't naive. I knew something was wrong. But admitting it felt like losing everything I had built my identity around. So I stayed. I smiled. I cooked his favorite meals, hoping the taste of the past might bring him back. It didn't. He'd eat quickly, thank me absently, and scroll through his phone while I cleared the table. One evening, after another silent dinner, I stood by the sink, washing dishes. He was behind me, laughing softly at something on his phone. The sound of his laughter, once my favorite melody, now made my chest tighten. I turned around, just watching him. There was this woman's name flashing on the screen, a name I'd never seen before. I asked gently, "Who's that?" He looked at me, eyes sharp, and said, "Just work." Just work. Two words that built walls higher than any argument could. I wish I could tell you I confronted him, that I found the courage right then to demand the truth. But I didn't. I swallowed it, just like I had swallowed so many small humiliations before. I told myself marriage meant endurance, that love was about loyalty, not confrontation. I see now how wrong that was. How loyalty without respect is just slow self-destruction. I started sleeping on the edge of the bed, barely breathing when he turned over beside me. Nights stretched long and hollow. I'd lie there, listening to the rain, imagining what my life would look like if I were brave enough to walk away. But I wasn't brave then. I was tired. One night, I woke up to find him gone. No note, no text. He came home near dawn, smelling like someone else's perfume. That was the night something in me cracked for good. I didn't scream or cry. I just stared at the ceiling and made myself a quiet promise. If love meant disappearing, I would stop participating. And yet, when the envelope arrived a few weeks later, it still felt like a shock. I had imagined this ending 1,000 times. But imagining it isn't the same as holding it in your hands. 15 years of compromise, of trying to be less so he could feel more, ended with his signature. For days, I wandered through that house like a ghost. I watered the plants, folded laundry, kept the cafe running, because that's what I do. I keep things running. But every night, when I came home, I could feel the emptiness waiting for me at the door. Still, somewhere deep inside, I knew this story wasn't finished. There was something he didn't know, something I had long forgotten myself. And when his lawyer finally called, I would learn that even the foundation he thought he stood on wasn't his at all. The call came on a Monday morning, just as the cafe was opening. I remember the sky was gray, the kind of sky that presses down on you. The phone buzzed on the counter, and when I saw his lawyer's name flashing, my heart did that familiar stutter. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, habit maybe, still responded to his world. "Mrs. Mitchell," the voice said, smooth and detached. "I'm calling to confirm receipt of the divorce papers." It was the first time anyone had said it aloud. Divorce, a word that tasted like rust. I told him yes, I had them. He cleared his throat, explained that we'd need to discuss assets, the house, the accounts. His words droned on, legal and cold, while I stared at the reflection of myself in the cafe window. My own face looked older, heavier, with something I couldn't name. After I hung up, I locked myself in the back room and let the tears come. Not loud sobs, just quiet streams down my face, like my body was releasing all the things I hadn't said. 15 years of laughter, arguments, and dinners, cooked for someone who had already left me in spirit before he ever left in body. That night, I sat at the dining table surrounded by papers. Our life was being divided into columns: his, hers, joint. Seeing it written down that way felt like a strange kind of obituary. Each page said in neat type what my heart already knew. He wanted a clean break, a reset, like I was a phase he'd outgrown. I tried to read the fine print, but my eyes blurred. I thought about the young woman I'd been when we married, full of certainty and softness, thinking love would protect me from everything. I remembered the day he proposed by the river, the way he promised, "You'll never have to face anything alone." He'd meant it then, I think. But people change. Sometimes, love fades not with anger, but with indifference, which is worse. I called my daughter that night. She lives 2 states away with her own family now. When she picked up, her voice was full of warmth and worry. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, and I lied automatically. "I'm fine, sweetheart," because that's what mothers do. They protect their children from their own pain. She offered to come down, but I told her not to. I didn't want her to see me like that, half woman, half wreckage. After we hung up, I went into our bedroom. His closet was half empty, his favorite jacket gone. The smell of his aftershave still hung in the air. I sat on the edge of the bed and realized how foreign it felt, this room we once shared. I tried sleeping there, but my chest tightened every time I closed my eyes. So I moved to the couch. The cushions were lumpy, but at least they didn't carry his shape. Days passed in a fog. I'd wake, make coffee, open the cafe, smile for customers, then return to silence. Evenings were the worst. I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at the wall where our wedding picture had hung. I'd taken it down the night I found the papers. Now there was just a faint outline where it used to be, like even the paint remembered better days. I started noticing the little details of our home as if seeing them for the first time. The porch swing we bought our first summer here. The dent in the hallway where we'd once dropped a heavy box while moving in. Every corner whispered something about us, about me, and I realized something unsettling. I had built my whole sense of self around being us. Now there was only me, and I didn't know who that was anymore. One evening, as I sifted through another stack of documents, I found a folder I didn't recognize. Inside were property papers, old, yellowed copies from when we bought the house. My father's signature was there, bold and sure. My heart skipped. He'd passed away not long after that purchase, but I still remembered his voice. "Always protect what you build, Gracie. Don't sign away your safety." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, bright and unapologetic. I sat there with my coffee and that folder on the table. The pages spread out like quiet witnesses. The realization still felt unreal. After all the years we'd shared this house, all the nights I'd questioned my worth inside its walls, he'd never realized it wasn't his to take. I looked closer. My name, just mine, on the deed. My father had handled the paperwork back then, insisted on it. I had been too distracted by newlywed bliss to pay attention. I set the folder down, feeling something stir inside me, a pulse of strength I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since the envelope appeared, I wasn't crying. I was remembering. Maybe this wasn't an ending. Maybe it was the beginning of something I hadn't expected. The moment I'd learn what it really meant to stand on my own. I called my father's old attorney, a man named Mr. Collins. He was retired now, living up north, but his voice on the phone was steady as ever. When I explained what I'd found, he chuckled softly, not out of mockery, but memory. "Your dad was a smart man, Grace. He wanted you to be protected, just in case." Just in case. I hadn't known he'd foreseen so much. Maybe fathers just know the quiet ways their daughters give too much. Mr. Collins confirmed it. The house was mine. Legally, solely mine. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence for a long time. There was a strange peace in that knowledge. Not revenge, not triumph. Just a calm understanding that, for once, something had been built that couldn't be taken from me. Later that afternoon, his lawyer called again. The man's tone was different now, polite, almost nervous. "We'll need to discuss the house, Mrs. Mitchell," he said, voice thin with expectation. I could almost hear him assuming the outcome. "That won't be necessary," I told him. "The house belongs to me." There was a pause, then a faint sound of shuffling papers. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but our records." "Check the deed," I said, steady as stone. "My father filed it. You'll find his name and mine, not my husband's." He stammered, promised to review it, and ended the call. I sat back in my chair, feeling the first genuine smile tug at my lips in months. Not because I'd won, but because I'd found a piece of myself that he could never touch. That evening, I walked through every room slowly, like reclaiming each one. The bedroom, the hallway, the porch with its creaking boards, all mine. I wasn't the woman who had begged for love in this space anymore. I was the woman who had survived it. When he finally showed up, unannounced, 2 days later, I was ready. I heard his car before I saw it, the tires crunching against the gravel. He walked in like someone expecting to be greeted with regret. But I didn't flinch. He looked thinner, tired. Maybe guilt had finally caught up. "Grace," he said, his voice lower than I remembered. "We need to talk." I nodded, motioned toward the table. He sat across from me, where he'd left the envelope weeks before. The symmetry of it wasn't lost on me. "I talked to my lawyer," he began, clearing his throat, "about the house. There seems to be some confusion." "There isn't," I replied quietly. "It's mine." He blinked, as if waiting for me to take it back, to soften, to apologize for the truth. When I didn't, something in his face hardened. "You can't seriously think." "I don't think," I said. "I know." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Outside, the cicadas sang. Inside, the air between us turned final. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then stood up. I watched him realize, truly realize, that he had left me with nothing, but had nothing to take. When he finally spoke, it wasn't anger I heard. It was confusion, disbelief. "You planned this." I almost laughed. "No, I just never erased what was already mine." He left soon after, slamming the door like punctuation on the end of a story. I stood there for a long time, staring at that closed door, feeling the weight of 15 years lift from my shoulders. That night, I didn't sleep on the couch. I went back to my bed. The sheets were cool, the pillow unfamiliar, but for the first time, the quiet felt like peace instead of punishment. As I drifted to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. He'd tried to take everything, but the one thing he didn't understand was this. You can't steal from someone who's already found their freedom. And as the morning light crept through the curtains, I realized the truth of it. The house had always been mine. I just needed to remember that I was too. The morning after he left, I sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the magnolia trees. The world had gone on as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I'd spent weeks drowning in grief, and now there was this strange, powerful quiet inside me. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something stronger than despair. I thought that would be the end of it. But endings, I've learned, have a way of demanding closure on their own terms. 3 days later, he came back. I knew the sound of his truck before I saw it. How the engine sputtered right before it shut off. The uneven rhythm of his boots on the porch steps. I didn't move. The front door opened, and he stood there like a ghost of the life I'd already buried. He looked different, tired, older, the confidence stripped from his shoulders. In his hand was a folder, thick with papers. I didn't need to see them to know. They were about the house. He still didn't understand that what he'd lost couldn't be returned to him on paper. "Grace," he said softly, almost kindly, "can we talk?" I nodded, not out of softness, but because I wanted to look him in the eye one last time. He followed me to the kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd once cooked him breakfast, where I'd found that envelope weeks ago. Funny how the same space can hold both the beginning and the end of love. He sat across from me, the morning light cutting through the window, making dust dance between us. "Look," he began, "I know things have been hard. I didn't want it to end like this." His voice cracked just slightly, the way it used to when he was trying to charm his way out of a lie. I watched him carefully. "You wanted a divorce," I said. "You made that decision without me." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Maybe I acted too fast. Maybe I was angry. He paused, searching my face. "We built this life together, Grace. We built that house. You can't honestly think that it's mine?" I interrupted gently. "It is. And you know what? That's not even the part that matters anymore." He frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "You walked away from more than a marriage. You walked away from someone who would have given you everything. Someone who did give you everything. And now, you're realizing you can't take what wasn't yours to begin with." He didn't respond at first. Just sat there, staring, as if seeing me for the first time in years. Maybe he did. Maybe this was the first time he'd really looked at me since the day we said our vows. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "You've changed." I smiled a small, quiet smile. "No, I just stopped apologizing for existing." The words hung in the air between us, soft but final. He looked down, fiddled with his wedding ring. He still wore it. I didn't. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he whispered. "I know," I said, "but you did anyway." He stood up, restless, pacing by the window. The man who once held all the power in our marriage now looked like someone searching for a way back into a life that had already shut its door. When he finally turned back to me, his eyes were glassy. "So that's it then, after 15 years?" "That's it," I said, "but don't think of it as 15 years wasted. Think of it as 15 years that taught me exactly who I am." He didn't answer, just nodded slowly, defeated. I walked him to the door, and when he stepped outside, the morning air hit both of us differently. For me, it felt like release. For him, maybe realization. He paused on the porch, glancing back once. "I hope you'll forgive me someday," he said quietly. "I already have," I replied. Forgiving you was the only way I could move forward. He nodded again, then walked to his truck without another word. The sound of the engine faded down the road until there was nothing left but bird song and the whisper of wind through the trees. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was peace. That afternoon, I opened the windows, let the sunlight pour in, and began cleaning the house. Not to erase him, but to reclaim it. I boxed up old clothes, moved furniture, scrubbed the floors. Each sweep of the broom felt like taking back a piece of myself. As I worked, I realized something powerful. I wasn't cleaning to forget. I was cleaning to begin again. And when I finally sat down that evening, tired but lighter, I whispered to the quiet house, "You're mine now. All of you." What I didn't know was that the hardest part wasn't letting him go. It was learning how to live again without the weight of his shadow. The days that followed felt strange at first. I'd wake up expecting to hear his footsteps, to smell his aftershave in the hallway, to hear the coffee brewing before I even got out of bed. But the house stayed silent, and in that silence, I started to find something beautiful, the sound of my own rhythm. At first, the loneliness hit like a wave. Even the simplest moments, making breakfast, folding laundry, felt heavier. I'd catch myself setting 2 plates on the table, out of habit. But then, little by little, I began learning to fill that empty space with things that belonged only to me. I started repainting the walls. Soft sage green in the kitchen, light cream in the bedroom. The colors felt fresh, alive. I took down the old wedding photos and replaced them with framed landscapes I'd painted years ago, but never had the courage to hang. Each brushstroke was a piece of me coming back. The first few mornings I opened the cafe alone again, I noticed how different the sunlight felt. It used to feel harsh, like something exposing what I'd lost. Now it felt warm, like a gentle reminder that life keeps showing up if you let it. People in town began to notice too. My regulars would smile and say, "Grace, you look different lately." I'd shrug and say, "Just sleeping better, I guess." But deep down, I knew it wasn't sleep. It was peace. In the evenings, after closing the cafe, I'd walk to the park by the river. The same river where he once promised me forever. I thought being there would hurt. But instead, it made me realize something important. Forever doesn't mean staying. It means continuing. And I was still doing that. There were hard days, of course. Grief doesn't vanish. It lingers in corners, quiet and patient. Some nights I'd pour myself a glass of wine and sit on the porch, wondering if he ever thought about me. But instead of crying, I'd find myself whispering gratitude for the lesson, for the strength, for the woman I'd become. Friends who hadn't seen me in months started coming by again. One afternoon, my friend Caroline from the cafe dropped off a bunch of wildflowers. She hugged me tight and said, "You've got your light back, Grace." I didn't realize until that moment how dim I'd let it get. I also started writing again. Nothing grand, just journaling at first. Thoughts, reflections, pieces of memory that still clung to me. Writing them down helped me see them for what they were, experiences, not chains. I wasn't trapped in my past anymore. I was translating it into meaning. One night, my daughter called. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "Mom," she said, "I've been reading your notes you posted online. They're beautiful." I was surprised. I had been sharing snippets of my reflections anonymously on a small blog, just as a way to heal. Apparently, people had found them. Other women, some older, some younger, all writing to say how my words gave them courage to start over. I felt tears sting my eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from realization. All the pain, all the silence, all the loss, it had transformed into something else. Hope, connection, purpose. After the call, I sat in the living room, the same one where I'd once cried over those divorce papers. The house glowed softly under the lamplight, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. I looked around and saw not emptiness, but space. Space I'd finally made for myself. The woman I had been, the one who whispered instead of speaking, who apologized for wanting more, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone still tender, still learning, but stronger in ways I never thought possible. Sometimes I still catch my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize her. Not because she's changed beyond recognition, but because she finally looks free. And I know this is just the beginning. I don't need a man or a marriage or even validation to define my worth. My life is mine to rebuild, repaint, rewrite. The hardest part of losing someone isn't their absence. It's relearning who you are without their shadow standing over you. But once you do, the light that returns is blinding in the best way. I closed my journal that night, smiled to myself, and whispered a quiet truth. I may have lost the life I thought I wanted, but I found the woman I was always meant to be. And as I turned off the lights and went to bed, for the first time in years, I slept through the night. Peaceful, whole, and entirely my own. I closed my journal that night, smiled to myself, and whispered a quiet truth. I may have lost the life I thought I wanted, but I found the woman I was always meant to be. And as I turned off the lights and went to bed, for the first time in years, I slept through the night, peaceful, whole, and entirely my own. The morning light that once felt like intrusion now poured through my windows like an invitation. I had started to love the sound of waking birds again, the way the world began quietly before the rush of the day. Each sunrise felt like proof that life continues, even after everything you thought defined it is gone. It had been months since the divorce was finalized. The papers were signed, the arguments over, the silence now belonged to me. I thought that would be the end of my story, a slow fade into ordinary days. But something unexpected began to happen. The world started to find me again. It had been months since the divorce was finalized. The papers were signed, the arguments over, the silence now belonged to me. I thought that would be the end of my story, a slow fade into ordinary days. But something unexpected began to happen. The world started to find me again. It began with an email. The subject line read, "Your words helped me leave." I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, until I read the first line. "Grace, I don't know who you are, but I want you to know that your story gave me the courage to walk away from a man who made me feel small." I froze. My little blog, the one I had started just to make sense of my own heartbreak, had found its way to someone else's heart. I read her words twice, then 3 times, tears streaming freely down my face. That night, I wrote back. I told her she wasn't alone. But the hardest step wasn't leaving. It was believing you deserved something better once you did. After that, more letters came. Women from across the country, some older, some younger, writing about their own stories of loss, betrayal, and rediscovery. They called me brave, but all I had done was tell the truth. Still, reading their messages, I realized something powerful. Pain shared becomes something softer, something that binds rather than breaks. At the cafe, I started to see familiar faces linger longer over their coffee. A woman named Martha, who had recently lost her husband, began coming in every morning just to talk. We'd sit by the window before opening hours, sharing quiet truths about starting over. One afternoon, as we talked, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, Grace," she said, stirring her coffee slowly, "you could help so many more women if you wrote a book. Not a sad one, a real one, about life after everything falls apart." The idea scared me. Who was I to write a book? I wasn't a writer, just a woman who survived. But that night, sitting by the soft glow of my desk lamp, I realized that maybe that was exactly the point. Maybe the world didn't need polished wisdom. Maybe it just needed honesty. So I began to write, not as the woman who'd been left, but as the woman who learned to stay with herself. I wrote about the early days, the grief, the silence, the tiny victories, painting the kitchen walls, sleeping through the night, laughing for the first time without guilt. Writing wasn't just healing, it was rebirth. Each word I typed pulled me further from the past and closer to the woman I had become. Months passed, and the seasons shifted again. Savannah summers are heavy with humidity, the air thick and alive. I'd open the cafe windows to let in the smell of rain, customers laughing inside, my own laughter joining theirs. One evening, after closing, I checked my blog. There were hundreds of comments, messages from strangers thanking me, sharing their own stories. Among them was one that caught my eye. It read, "Your story saved me. I was where you were, married for 20 years, invisible in my own home. Now I'm free and I'm not afraid anymore." I sat there, tears falling, the glow of the screen lighting my face. For so long, I'd thought my story ended with heartbreak. That here it was, alive, echoing in the hearts of women I'd never met. That night, as the crickets sang outside and the air smelled of jasmine, I understood what my father had meant all those years ago when he said, "Protect what you build." I thought he meant the house, the deeds, the tangible things. But now I knew he meant me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, giving, creating. And as I closed my laptop, I whispered to the quiet house, "We did it." Not I, we. Because every woman who had read my story, every voice that had found courage through mine, had become part of something bigger. The house that once felt too big for one person was now filled with invisible company. Echoes of resilience, hope, and shared strength. But the most beautiful part, I no longer needed anyone else to complete it. The walls that once held my pain now held my peace. And as I drifted to sleep, one thought stayed with me. When a woman decides to rebuild herself, she doesn't just rise. She becomes a lighthouse for others still lost in the dark. The following spring marked exactly 1 year since he'd left. I didn't plan to mark the date. It found me, quietly, as I was tending to the roses I'd planted in the front yard. The same yard where we once took anniversary photos, laughing like we'd never run out of days. The roses were in full bloom now, deep red and untamed. I stood there, hands in the dirt, and realized how poetic it was. New life thriving in the same soil that once held so much loss. After washing my hands, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch. The air smelled of earth and rain. I looked out over the yard at the house I'd reclaimed and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete stillness. Not the empty stillness that used to ache, but the kind that fills you, like peace finding a place to rest. I thought about the woman I was a year ago, scared, small, waiting for someone else's permission to start again. And then I thought about who I'd become, a woman who knew her worth without needing anyone to remind her. In that moment, I realized something simple but profound. Love didn't fail me. I just outgrew the version of myself that settled for less than I deserved. My daughter called that afternoon. She was visiting soon with her family, she said. "We can stay at a hotel," she offered, "if it's too much." I laughed. "Sweetheart, this house has more love in it now than it ever did before. You're staying right here." After the call, I sat for a long while watching the shadows move across the yard. Every scar in this place told a story. The dented porch rail, the creaky steps, even the faint stain on the kitchen counter from that morning I spilled coffee while reading the divorce papers. None of it made me sad anymore. It just reminded me that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about transforming it. As the sun dipped low, turning the sky amber, I thought about forgiveness. People assume forgiveness is a gift you give to others. But I've learned it's really a gift you give to yourself. I forgave him long ago, not because he asked for it, but because I refused to let bitterness take root where my peace was meant to grow. That night, I took out my journal and began to write the final entry for my book. I wrote about how grief and grace often live side by side, about how letting go isn't the end of love, but the beginning of truth. I wrote about the women who'd written to me, about the way their courage mirrored my own. And I wrote about the house, that old yellow house with its wraparound porch that had become a symbol of everything I thought I'd lost and everything I'd found. When I finished, I set down my pen and looked around the room. The lamp cast a golden glow across the walls, and for the first time, I didn't see emptiness. I saw possibility. Maybe one day I'll fall in love again. Maybe I won't. Either way, I'm no longer waiting for someone else to make me feel alive. I already am. I walked outside one last time before bed. The night was cool, the air humming with crickets. I tilted my head back and looked up at the stars, bright, endless, untamed. And then, softly, I spoke the words that had carried me through it all. He took my love for granted, but he couldn't take my spirit. The house? That was just walls and wood. But me? I was the foundation all along. I smiled then, not for the story I'd lived, but for the one I was still writing. Because the truth is, when everything falls apart, it doesn't always mean the end. Sometimes it's just life clearing space for who you were always meant to become. And if my story has taught me anything, it's this. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet woman who refuses to break, who rebuilds her life piece by piece, until one day she looks around and realizes she made it home again. Because even after the longest heartbreak, the heart learns to bloom again.